Senhoras e senhores, espero que estejam todos com seu som já ligado, preparados para o início do nosso grande evento. Sejam muito bem-vindos à primeira etapa da realização do Congresso Mundial de Águas Subterrâneas, fruto da junção dos eventos da IAH, da ALHSUD e da Águas. Our joint presential event that would gather the largest number of groundwater professionals and amateurs ever was hit by this tragic pandemic. Like in the lives of all of us, we had to move on. Our decision, innovate. We very much spread the extent of our event. It now has an online sequence that starts today, followed by a grand finale, which will be hybrid, presential plus online, as follows. Between September 21st, today, and 24th, this year, 2020, starting today, the online opening part of our event will take place. And you are presenting, you are actually in this presential event, in this online event with us. Thank you for the honor of seeing our event. From September 25th, just right after the event, to August 20th in the next year, we will offer every second week online webinars and lives to talk about groundwater science, technology, marketing, professional training, and inspirational themes. Between August 22nd to August 27th of 2021, next year, the presential event will be held at Espaço Arca in São Paulo, Brazil. We promise you a big party. Don't miss it. The event will be hybrid. Should you not be able to come, which will be a real pity, you may participate online and share part of the fun. This event could only be possible to become a reality thanks to our sponsors, our expositors, and our supporters. Please, I'm very glad to introduce you the names of our sponsors. We have the screen of them. Main sponsor is ANA, Agência Nacional de Águas e Saneamento Básico. Our support came from Comitê Bacia Hidrográfica do Rio São Francisco, Agência Peixe Vivo. And our expositors, the main arm that support us are Altri, Bodega do Poço, Chicago Pneumatic, Ebara, LG, Maxiagua, the Groundwater Project. Then we have CRI, CRI, Aragon, Clean, Franklin Environment, PASI, Perfuratrizes DTH, Agência Peixe Vivo novamente, Laboratório ALS, Brain, Laboratório Eurofins, GHIDRO, GLP, Exis, In Situ, PRD Higgs, Trionic, Vapor Solution e WST. We would like again to acknowledge their help and their support through this pandemic. They understood our problems and they stayed with us, standing on these hard times to support an event that is very important to our community and to water in general for the world. Thank you very much for your support. You were very kind and very supportive all the time. Without further delay, I would like then to invite Dr.António Chambel, the president of the International Association of Hydrogeologists, to say a few words. Please be patient because we're going to start his video. Thank you.
Dear organizers, dear participants in the meetings organized during this week. The pandemics have changed the way we act and the way we see the world. Our 47th Congress was to begin exactly today, but the pandemics caused the postponement of the Congress for August 2021. To commemorate the actual date, the organizing committee decided to organize a series of conferences and debates related with groundwater and involving a strong range of experts. EIH expects that all of you can appreciate and learn with these debates and congratulates the organizers for this initiative. Aos colegas brasileiros que participam nesta série de conferências, um abraço fraterno e desejo de uma boa aprendizagem, aproveitando a excelência dos oradores. Keep well, keep safe, and participate in this excellent event. All the best for all of you.
I'd like to thank you, Dr.António Chambel, for his nice words and the support of IAH to the realization of this event. Now, I would like to ask Dr. Miguel Rangel Medina, Presidente da ALHSUD, to say a few words. Thank you and very welcome, Miguel, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a big pleasure to be here with you, and it's a big opportunity in this time because it's a different way to share in digital way this new Congress. On behalf of ALHSUD, I want to give the welcome to Dr. John Cherry because he is here with us, and you are very welcome, sir. We hope that you have the best Congress ever, because it's a new era. We are different. Never this kind of Congresses were like that. So we hope that this will be a good opportunity to get the best way for first time. Thank you very much and enjoy. Thank you for everyone. Thanks, Everton.
Thank you, Miguel, for your nice words, and again for all your support and the help you put ALHSUD to help us and to support along the whole transition and the organization of the event. That was very welcome. We thank you very much. I would like to invite now Dr. José Paulo. José Paulo is the president of the Associação Brasileira de Águas Subterrâneas, Águas. José Paulo, por favor, seja bem-vindo.
Hi, everyone. Well, I'm a Brazilian Groundwater Association president and ALHSUD, Latin America Association in Brazil chapter. Hi, I'd like to thank the presence of all people and institutions here present. Don't need introductions. Their names speak for themselves. I never read the speech, but now I train it with a new word. I train and read the speech. I only met John Cherry last year. I can affirm that John, besides his knowledge, is a good guy. I really like John. I say John because we are Brazilians, and for us, it's natural to refer to people by their first name. It's a sign of friendship. The same way I call Emilio Custódio just Emilio, person who I admire a lot. I would like to give a special thanks for 1,500 registers in this Congress, which shows the confidence in the associations EAH, ALHSUD, and Águas, and that we are together in a new world, where concepts were changing and people are really important. We won't speak only about hydrology, but also about sanitation, poverty, laws, and relations between groundwater and society, and also about people who consume every day our important groundwater. That's it, and thank you very much. Thank you, Everton. Thank you, John, and Miguel, and Bruna too. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your nice words. Thank you very much, José, for your nice words. And we would like to thank you, and the group, the Brazilian organization group that worked very hard to make this happen. We do know how hard it was to have a presential event that had to be postponed and transformed into this new option that we have. You are, I can congratulate all of us and you. I know how hard you worked for that. So thank you very much. Okay, guys, that's all for the opening ceremony. I would like to thank all of the presidents for your help. And I would like to invite everybody to watch and participate on YouTube or on our website, on our app of the first session of our event, okay? That will be an interview with Dr. John Cherry. Okay. John, I'm not sure if I should introduce John because most of us that work with groundwater know John Cherry. I'm being very glad to work with him, close to him for the last 3 years. We know each other for so many years. Okay. John is the author of the famous book, Freeze and Cherry, Groundwater. He is the recipient of this year, 2020, Nobel of Water, the Stockholm Water Prize, which is an honor not only for him, but for all the groundwater professionals, because this prize rarely, I think, is the first time that was given to a hydrogeologist, such an important profession, an important part of the water in the world. Okay, he's the head of the Groundwater Project, and he will have the opportunity to explain to all of you what the Groundwater Project is and how important it'll be for the groundwater community and water in general in the world. He is a former professor of the University of Waterloo, where I had the pleasure to meet him. And he's now the professor at the University of Guelph in Canada. Well, that's among many other important achievements. So let's go and talk to him because he's this important person and you're not here to listen to my speech. Okay, welcome, John. Could you say some words just to welcome everybody, please, just to start?
Oh, hello, Everton. It's my great pleasure to participate in this project that you and your colleagues have worked so hard to get going. In this time when we're all locked down and not traveling around the world, to have this opportunity to keep groundwater up there in the world stage is marvelous. And I thank my Brazilian colleagues, those that have spoken, and others for making all this happen. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We thank you for being so kind to participate in the opening ceremony of our event. So I'll have the first question and I'll explain to the public how is the dynamics of our interview so people can participate. In about 30 minutes, we'll have some questions for you. It's going to be one for me in that sense. Myself, Bruna, Miguel. Then myself, Bruna, Miguel. And then we'll have, we'll open the questions to the public. The public, they have to participate with questions using the app in of our event. They can download the app. The connection and the link for the app would be available on your screen there, and you'll be able to download it. And we're using that because otherwise it will be just impossible to reach through the YouTube the amount of people that are participating in our event. So I kindly ask you to please download the app and send us questions, and we're gonna pick some of them because we won't have time very likely to answer them all. Okay. So let's start with our first question, and thank you again, John, for participating. Why groundwater matters? How could we tell this to the average citizen that does not come to our congresses? What are the most important things people need to know? Please, John.
Well, Everton, that is the big problem. The general public don't know that groundwater is important. And I think it's generally acknowledged that with climate change, we have a global water crisis. There's lots of media attention and large organizations in the UN and whatnot, paying attention to the global water crisis, but nobody seems to understand that groundwater is at the essence, it's at the heart of this crisis. And that's because, of course, we can't see it. So the general public can't see it, the politicians can't see it. And in general, the people who manage groundwater are not hydrogeologists and they can't see it. So the challenge then is how are we going to get people to take groundwater seriously? And we can't do that as we have been doing by just telling them that it's important. So we have to find ways then to relate to what people, relate to. Groundwater is, basically used to support 40% of the world's agriculture. A third of the world's major aquifers are so overpumped that they likely can't recover. We're going to add, 2 or 3 billion people to the world's population. And all of the rivers and lakes that we have are in full use and overexploited in general. So in fact, groundwater is going to be the key to what's going to happen around the globe when we greatly expand our population. And there's a great to-do recently about extinction, but extinction, when it's discussed, is never discussed in the context of groundwater. Groundwater really is the water that sustains most rivers and lakes, and many ecosystems are what we call groundwater dependent. But who knows that? Who's studying that? Very few professors are studying that. So it's really not out there. So somehow we groundwater people have to explain groundwater so that not only the average person can appreciate it, so that water managers, all the people who haven't been educated in groundwater, that's our challenge now. And with electronic media and with conferences like this, we've got great new opportunities to do this. And one of the goals of the Groundwater Project, of course, is to write about groundwater for all readerships, all the way from children's books, one of which has already been published, on up to books for experts.
That's very good. That's very good. Bruna, your question, please.
Yes. First, it's a pleasure to participate in this interview with you, John. Thank you.
Excuse me, I forgot to introduce Bruna. Bruna, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. As a president of Early Career Hydrogeologists Network Brazil. And I am sure this Congress will be a big Congress. Thank you. Well, let's a question. I believe that winning the Stockholm Water Prize should be an immense honor. And as the recipient of the Stockholm Water Prize, who do you think this prize and its prestige will shed the light on groundwater protection and management?
Well, as you know, I've received a lot of prizes in my career, but almost all of them come from the groundwater community. And of course, it's wonderful to be acknowledged in your community, and I take great satisfaction from that. But the groundwater community really doesn't exist in the minds of the greater water community. So the important part of this Stockholm Water Prize to me, then it's a prize that attracts the attention of the entire water community. So all of a sudden, there's me, a hydrogeologist, receiving this prize, and people are saying, "Oh, wow, like what's a hydrogeologist? What's important there?" So this prize actually puts me in the spotlight and puts quite a bit of pressure on me to represent the groundwater community. And of course, I'm getting a lot of chance for media interviews, for little articles in magazines and newsletters, all of which have ignored groundwater. So in that sense, I think my colleagues around the world, as Everton has mentioned, are very pleased that I received this prize, not because I'm receiving another prize, but because it's a recognition of the importance of groundwater. Now, the United Nations 2 years ago has announced that 2022 will be the year of groundwater. So basically, the United Nations organizations, and there are many of them, have now realized that groundwater needs to be run up the flagpole so that people can see it. And so conferences like this and the opportunities that I have to speak then are all leading up to basically making groundwater, this hidden resource, observable. And so I have many more opportunities to tell a much broader audience about the importance of groundwater than I've ever had before. And of course, I need the help of all of you to help me figure out how to do this. Since the goal here is not to speak to hydrogeologists, the goal is to speak to everybody else in the world.
Very good, very good. Yeah, that's a very important point. Bruna, you're gonna add something.
No, thank you, John. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, that's a very important point.
So I might mention then that I had been nominated before for the Stockholm Water Prize, and I'm told I came close. So how did it happen that I actually got this prize? And it happened because the committee that chooses the prize people, basically a year ago, put 2 hydrogeologists on the selection committee. So why is it that I'm the first hydrogeologist to get this award? It's very simple. Groundwater wasn't considered to be important enough to even have a hydrogeologist on the selection committee. So 2 people on the selection committee were put on the committee in recognition, I think, of the impending importance of groundwater. So it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Well, you're being humble. You're being humble as usual. but you long deserved that prize. So I'm very sure about that. So Miguel, could you ask the next question, please?
Thank you. John, at first, as you permit me, I want to thank all this organizing committee, all the Brazilians, because they had a very big effort to reach this day. And of course, the next one. John, you know, this groundwater response for 98%, I can say about 2 very bad examples. In Mexico City, sometimes we reach 96%.
Yep.
And in my region, we have a coastal aquifer with high saline intrusion. So this kind of used reach 98% as usual of fresh water, of course, for human consumption. The question for you, please, is what are the greatest threats for groundwater and to its extent for water today? What's your idea? What's your opinion? Thank you.
Yeah, so there are 2 big threats. One is water overpumping, which is causing aquifer depletion. And as I mentioned, and apparently 1/3 of the great aquifers of the world have already been depleted, and others are being depleted. And that relates to our food supply and drinking water and everything. So that threat is known, but the threat is not being diminished very much because it's really water management is so difficult. And then at the same time, there's massive groundwater pollution going on. Nitrate is rising all over the world above the drinking water limits, and the drinking water limit for nitrate is set relatively high anyway. And then every year or 2 or 3, we find there's a new contaminant yet arising. So we have the dual threat, the combination of too much pumping and too many contaminants going into the ground. And people talk about sustainability, and there's a great emphasis on climate change, of course. But somehow we have to get the word out there that climate change is bringing on groundwater crises that are kind of beyond imagination. And one of the big effects of climate change, of course, which in Mexico you know better than most, are long droughts. So we had a drought in South Africa a few years ago. It was only 2 or 3 years long, and it was a crisis there. We had a drought in California a few years long. But these long droughts that are going to come at us with climate change are going to be many years to a decade or more. And those droughts have occurred in the geological past, and they're going to be accentuated with climate change. So it's the big threat then is a combination of overpumping with groundwater quality deterioration. And you mentioned seawater intrusion, like salt is a major issue. And going along with this basically is soil salinization. So the big threats are overpumping, salt, and nitrate, along with everything else. It really is a perfect storm. And if humanity is going to survive this storm in any major way, then it's going to have to be recognized that groundwater is a key part of the survival strategy. Now, who knows that other than the hydrogeologic community? And of course, that's our great challenge.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would just like to remind everybody that the questions should be addressed to John by using the app. Okay, John, the next question is mine. And I'd like to ask you before, not only along the question, but I know that the question might include the Groundwater Project, which is so big that could be included in any answer that you have here. Okay, so I would like you to answer the question, and if you could explain a bit what the Groundwater Project is for everybody, along with the answer of that question, please. Along your impressive career, you have urged the governments to devote more of their budget to groundwater monitoring. With rapid population growth and increasing impacts on climate change, what do you think can be done to encourage governments to devote more of their budget to groundwater? And I see part of the questions, like a part of that answer, would include education and reaching out to people, and that's where I think the Groundwater Project comes in. Please, thank you.
So Everton, the groundwater monitoring issue is so important because we can't track what's happening and make corrections unless we can monitor it properly. And there's hardly a country in the world that has what I would say is a modern groundwater monitoring network. Most countries have some wells out there and they kind of monitor them, but they were put in long ago, mostly for monitoring groundwater levels. So one of my big issues then is to try and persuade governments to recognize that groundwater is important. But once you get there, then there need to be national and provincial and state groundwater monitoring networks set up. And so how are we going to get, I mean, I've been preaching that in Canada for 40 years and have gotten absolutely nowhere. So the question then is, what do we mean by a modern groundwater monitoring network? And one of the purposes of the Groundwater Project then, as we bring hundreds of experts on board from around the world, is to find out the good examples. Which countries are doing it well? What are the good examples? Which states and provinces, etc. But I think that if I take Canada, for example, the only thing that'll ever move Canada forward to pay more attention to groundwater and monitoring will be public international embarrassment. So I think what the Groundwater Project needs to do, we're going to search the world for examples of responsible and sustainable groundwater monitoring. And we're going to ferret these out and we're going to kind of list them. We're going to explain why they're appropriate. And then I think what we need to do is basically rate every country in the world in terms of its level of groundwater monitoring. So that we hydrogeologists, who are always, shouting from the distant spaces into the water community, so we can point to things. For example, China has installed in the last 5 years 20,000 purpose-specific monitoring wells. The China Geological Survey has done half of them, and it's been a national priority. And I reached out to the leader of that project several weeks ago. Would he write a book for the Groundwater Project? And we will collaborate on that. How did they do it? And basically, they've got recording pressure transducers in every well, and they sample monthly for hundreds of parameters, etc. And their goal is to make it publicly available. So we need to get the excellent examples out there so that we're not just complaining. We groundwater people are always complaining because we're kind of ignored. The water managers are generally people who know nothing about groundwater, and we have to get beyond complaining. We have to get to the point of saying, here's how you should do it, And here are some organizations in some countries that are actually doing it. And the thing about groundwater monitoring now is there are new technologies, new types of wells, new types of multi-levels, new types of devices that you can insert down the wells. In a China case, I haven't seen it yet, but all this information is being sent by telemetry to Beijing, where you can kind of see it. But not only that, the goal is so the local people can see it. So the ultimate goal of groundwater monitoring is so that everybody can go onto an app and look at the water levels they're doing and look at the water quality. Now, that's the last thing that most governments want, basically, because they're all embarrassed about their lack of groundwater monitoring. So we have to put the heat on the senior people in the monitoring community, and we have to turn on some political heat. And that means getting the public involved so that they can see what the water levels are doing. So this is one of our biggest challenges, and I'm hoping then with conferences like this in the future and with the Groundwater Project, we can make some things happen.
Good, good. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Groundwater Project, just to make sure how it's going to work and how people can connect so we can live, this flame going along and pushing the information to the community at large?
So as I travel around the world, I get a lot of attention because of the Freeze Cherry 1979 textbook. And the world appreciated that. And in the 1980s, it was a very good textbook. When Al Freeze and I wrote that book, we actually knew what we were talking about. And that's partly because the amount of information was so small. And for decades, people said, well, John and Al, why don't you update it? But that wasn't possible because two authors couldn't update groundwater science because it's just mushroom. The amount of information is voluminous. Only one person, only the most we can know is a very small niche. So the Groundwater Project then is aimed at producing hundreds of textbooks on all the topics that are important and writing them clearly, not just writing some stuff, which is what we're used to do, but writing them so that students can understand it, which is a big challenge. That's synthesis. We already have 3 books published, and dozens more are coming down the pipeline. So it's to basically democratize groundwater knowledge, free of charge, written by experts. And once it's written, people can provide comments so we can always improve it. But not only that, but to translate it into several languages. So it's the Groundwater Project is for democratization of synthesized groundwater knowledge for understanding, translated into many languages so that it's a level playing field. You don't have to be at a wealthy university that can sign up for journals and whatnot and so forth. You can basically just download it by signing up. That's the goal. And now this was a crazy idea, and because when the idea got going, it was just a vague notion. And when I proposed it to people, they say, "Yeah, John, that's a really good idea, but how could it ever happen?" I had no idea how it could happen, except much to my total amazement, it is happening. And you and many others around the world then are making it happen. And my job is to cheerlead and draw attention to it. And make sure that people actually look at these amazing materials, and that hydrogeologists and others around the globe engage. And by others, we mean surface water hydrologists, we mean ecologists, we mean economists, we mean risk engineers, the whole bit. We need to get groundwater interfaced with all the other areas that matter. So we have a book being prepared on groundwater and governance. We have a book being prepared on groundwater economics. We want to have a book being prepared on the interface between groundwater and ecological systems. So it's not just hydrogeology. So basically, hydrogeology is at the core, and that's because groundwater, of all the fresh water in the world, groundwater is 99% of it. So it makes sense that groundwater be at the heart of the issue. And all the other topics then revolve around that. That's the big challenge. And what is so amazingly, I guess, gratifying and surprising to me is how well the groundwater community across the globe is buying into this. Lots of people are working very, very hard in their busy lives.
That's very true. Thank you. Thank you. Bruna, can you go to the next question, please?
Yes. In Malaga, Spain, you were approached by two lovely Turkish young ladies who called you Michael Jackson of Groundwater, a great compliment, I believe. How do you think your fame and prestige could boost the groundwater divulgation across the world? Could you speak more about this?
Yes, I think Everton was there. That was rather embarrassing. Embarrassing.
It's amazing.
It was fun.
It was fun and it was charming.
Yes.
You are.
And it reminded me then that with my fame, we as a group and everybody here has the we have the responsibility to kind of convert this into meaningful stuff, so the groundwater basically gets attention. And with me being kind of a center point of the groundwater community, then that helps allow me to reach out, and particularly when the younger generation, hears about an old textbook, and somehow they kind of hear about me, and then I get to promote what the modern scientists and what you people are doing in terms of bringing groundwater science to the user community. All this is good. Good and charming and actually very pleasing to me, because in fact it helps enhances my ability to spread the word.
That's very good. That's very good, John.
Thank you. It's amazing.
Well, actually, I've been when we think about strategies, it is good to have a number one in every field. And you clearly is the number one hydrogeologist in the world. I know you're humble enough not to admit it, but it is true. And I always relate when you see, the advertisement of NBA games on TV or whatever games you have, the big games. They only put one face for each team. They don't put several faces. Why? Because it's much easier for people at large to fix one person than several. This is not bad for all the other ones. It's much better because if one shows up, all the other people come in at the same time, and we have a better way of reaching out to people. So thank you very much for being this number one, and that we can borrow your prestige and live on that.
So I need the help of all of you then, always, to help me figure out better ways of explaining groundwater. So I'm the talking face, and we need to make sure that I have all the right words. I need to have the right sound bites. It's scary, eh? People say, well, why is groundwater important, and what should we do about it? And they want it in 30 seconds. Okay, well, that's ridiculous. But now I realize, okay, if it's 30 seconds, I have to learn how to do it.
and it's not easy. I know.
Yeah.
So Miguel, please, you're next.
Oh, thank you. If you let me, Jan, I want to share a remembrance from Mexico City when we met us in the Institute of Geophysics in the UNAM for the first time. This was in 1979. It was many years ago.
That's long.
That day, you had a book under your arm, and kindly you gave me this book as a gift. Of course, 25 years, I use it very well with my students, but things were changing, and they are not going to the books anymore. They use more the, like us now, the digital media. And that's why this question, please. Of course, you talk already about this project, but the Groundwater Project is supposed to reach to anyone again. how do you think about the translation that, of course, we Mexicans participated in the translation of this book, Groundwater? How you think that this translation will be a part of it, of this change? How will be now in these times? Could you have any opinion, please?
Well, translations are going to be key. And with the arrogance of the English-speaking world, there has been the view that other peoples around the world should just learn English, because English is the language of science. But we know from experience that for people to relate to practical science and really make use of it, we have to get everything that the Groundwater Project's producing translated into as many of the important global languages as possible. Even for those people who know English fairly well, there are subtleties, and with the books translated, then you can learn technical English even better. I was a postdoc in France back in the late 60s, and I spent a lot of time trying to become very capable in reading the French hydrogeological literature. And the best way to do that is to have a book in English and have a book in the other language. So we and the Freeze and Cherry book has been translated in several languages. So the challenge of the Groundwater Project now is to get a methodology and procedure going, so these translations can occur relatively fast and good quality, so that we in fact can have a true groundwater community. And we can't have a true community unless we've got it out there in all the languages. So, and the Portuguese version of the Freeze and Cherry book was translated very quickly, very capably in a particular procedure. And that's an example as to how it could be done. And also, I think as Everton has led the way on, by getting the hydrogeologic communities around the world in other languages translating, then they become participants. So it's a way of getting thousands and thousands of people participating in this global project, so that they can feel part of it. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to create a global groundwater community. And it was a crazy idea that started 4 years ago. And my colleagues would say, "Yeah, John, this is a big idea, and I think it's a good idea, but how do you think it would ever happen?" And my answer was, "I have no idea." And it began to happen. And then I would lay awake at night saying, "Oh, like we're how can I keep going?" And then things would happen. So it's got traction, and people are joining, and the translations from not only translations in other countries, but chapters written about the great aquifers of Mexico, for example. We need to know the problems that are happening with groundwater in all the various countries of the world to be a community. And I guess what I'm finding out now as I engage in this project and travel around the world, there's such amazing learning examples in many countries. So with the groundwater, books being controlled basically by English-speaking people from Europe mostly and North America, that not only is it in English, but it's strongly biased to the types of problems we've been working on. And so now I'm saying, wow, we got all these great examples from other countries. We got to get as many people involved as possible, so that those in the English-speaking world understand about the global groundwater problem. And you could say, oh well, in any given country, it's just your local problem. But the food that's traveling around the world has groundwater in it. It's got groundwater as virtual water. So in fact, once you start looking at the food and the products and the clothes and the cotton and all that stuff, we're truly connected in a global groundwater community. And that's why we have to have all these translations getting out there as fast as possible.
Yes, and about this global community, I think that we have the hydrology, international hydrology, three couples, very important.
Yep.
The Estudio en Llamas, Freeze and Cherry, and Foster Irata.
Yep.
These three couples were very important for these times.
Yep.
And of course, I hope that for the future. And thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Thank you for meeting me in 1979.
Yeah.
We're still working on groundwater because it's so interesting and important and exciting.
Okay.
Just to remind that Miguel helped to translate into the present chair into Spanish.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's a part of the group.
Yeah.
So just would like to remind everybody that the groundwater project that we're mentioning here, this great initiative for groundwater, may be reached at gw-project.org. 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 Okay, so John, we have some questions. Thank you, guys. Stay put because we need you to participate. John, we have some questions coming from the audience.
Good.
One came here from Priscilla Marie. I'll translate that to you. I'm a biologist, and I'd like you to comment a little bit about the importance of the microbial ecosystems and its functions in groundwater, if you could, please.
When I wrote the Freeze and Cherry book, I had some suspicion that groundwater microbiology would be important. And I think we had a page or two on it. And as the last 40 years have gone by, groundwater microbiology has mushroomed into a huge field. And we now know then that almost everything to do with groundwater quality has to do with redox and pH and EH and all of that. And much of that then is microbe controlled. So I'm pleased to say that of the first 20 books that we'll be publishing, one of them is basically on groundwater microbiology, written by expert authors at the University of Toronto, and it should be out in a few months. So one of the great goals of the Groundwater Project is to integrate microbiology and biology in general as far as we can take it, so that students in microbiology and biology then can see that their knowledge is very relevant, and vice versa. Microbes are everywhere. They're at all depths below the ground, and they're sitting there doing something, and basically, in many cases, governing the chemistry of the water. And groundwater pollution would be a total global disaster if it weren't for the fact that many contaminants actually disappear. If they're organic contaminants, they disappear because microbes are there making them disappear.
Thank you very much, John. I have a question here, another question, and this is a person you might know. It's Ricardo Irata.
Oh.
So his question is, a friend of mine who was a very important Catholic theologist used to say that prophet is a person who lives so intensely the present that he or she can see the future. I think that you are in this category of person. In this way, my question to you is, what is the future of groundwater? More specifically, what is groundwater's role for the new era that we live, where we observe a strong technology development, high money concentration on the hands of a few people, and poverty reduction?
Oh, wow. That's a very big question.
You're the prophet. You're the prophet.
Yeah. And I've often been asked, like, what's the future for groundwater? And people ask me that, I think, because as it turns out in my career, I've always been able to move my research and my interests to where the future is soon going to be. So I stumbled into groundwater contamination before people thought it was important. And I stumbled forward onto DNAPLs and whatnot and so forth. So with no great intent and no great desire and no great knowledge, I have been, sort of at the leading edge of change. And now this question, I must say, I have not thought about it much, other than to you know, since droughts are coming and good quality water is diminishing because of contamination and because of salt, then fresh, drinkable, usable groundwater then is going to be the only thing available because the rivers and lakes have been used up. Now people will say, oh, well, we've got desalinization. Oh yeah, sure, we've got desalinization. It's expensive. It's got its own environmental downside. And desalinization will really only do good for those really wealthy countries. So it kind of leads me back to the fact that groundwater is everywhere beneath our feet. Okay, we hydrogeologists know that, others don't. And the fresh groundwater that's really usable isn't all that large. We're over pumping it and we're ignoring it. So the future for groundwater has to be a focus on the good quality groundwater we have left as a valuable resource. I mean, people pay more money for bottled water than they do for gasoline in some places. And yet, in fact, groundwater is so underpriced, and in that sense, it's just a wasted resource. So the crisis, the fact that the United Nations then has designated 2022 as the year of groundwater is an indication that a lot of people outside of the groundwater field are now realizing that groundwater is key. They don't quite know why, and they don't know what to do about it. But somehow we in the groundwater community have to get the issues focused enough so that people can see possibilities for better decision making. And it's a perfect storm, as I mentioned, and we, the groundwater community, have to kind of get it focused. And you know, an example, for example, water that has too much salt to be easily used has been considered to be valueless. And now in some jurisdictions, they're recognizing that, you know, salinity up to 4,000 milligrams per liter is valuable water. And if you're going to desalinize, then desalinizing slightly salty groundwater is much cheaper than desalinizing seawater. And maybe we'll be going to be mixing, you know, really high quality water with less quality water. So I think the future means there's going to have to be a high level of sophistication. And coming back to the groundwater monitoring network in China, because China was, you know, a backward country until recently, and because groundwater is so important, they had the great advantage of kind of starting over. So the government declared we're going to have a national groundwater monitoring network. They put the best people in China in charge of it, and they're using modern technology. All their wells are equipped with pressure transducers that send a signal to Beijing, so everybody in China will be able to see what the water levels are doing. And then we have to get there with groundwater quality. So with these amazing advances in technology, we're going to be able to measure things at lower cost, faster, and we're going to be able to transmit them. And the key is lower cost. You know, pressure transducers used to cost a fortune, and now you can make them in some organizations relatively low cost. So I think we're in a transition for groundwater becoming a high-tech field. In general, you basically hire a driller, they drill a well. It's the same old type of well that you drilled 100 years ago, and you kind of put something in it. So we haven't lived in the modern world of high technology, and it's starting to happen. Computer models now, you know, they can do amazing things, but they're hardly ever being used. It's hardly a city or a state or a province in the world where the computer models are being used at the levels in which they should be, given our monitoring capabilities. So that didn't answer the question, but it's a question that I need to think about more thoroughly. So the next time I get it asked, I have it better framed. And that's one of the advantages of these interviews and whatnot. I can go away from this interview and say, okay, there's some things here that I have to better frame, and I'll try the answers out on you people. And the next time, then I'll be in better shape.
Well, don't worry.
Thanks for the question.
Don't worry about that. I have one point that I realized from your question, from your answer there. One point is that not only what's going to be of groundwater in the future, like looking at a crystal ball. You touched the idea because you said, well, I started working with contaminants and then DNAPL and so on and so forth. Well, isn't it mostly what we do that makes the groundwater happen than what's going to happen in groundwater? Because we had the big start with contaminants that you had the opportunity to be leading at that time. Same for DNAPL. Isn't it the way that we as a community could push things to make it happen instead of only envisioning the future? In that way, what Ricardo says, living intensely the present, is because we know what's going on. Wouldn't it be to us to help that, John, like you've done in the past?
Yeah, so the problem with, say, groundwater contamination is that we in the scientific community, we basically wait for the next crisis. So nobody predicted the DNAPL crisis and recently PFAS. So we're sitting here being reactive. And it's kind of a good business, we sit here, a crisis comes along, there's a new contaminant, and we get some research money or whatever, and we all go about our business, of course. So what we have to do is be much more proactive, proactive in what we ask government to do. Like, what are all the contaminants in a well? And an analysis for that would cost many hundreds of dollars, or maybe thousands of dollars. Well, some wells need to be analyzed for that, so we know what's coming at us. If these concentrations are there in parts per billion now, they might be in parts per million later on, etc. So we in the groundwater community then have to get out of the mode of just being reactive. We have to promote basically looking into the future. And that brings me then to something that I've learned about recently, which is called the circular economy. And basically in our current economy, it's cradle to grave, okay? All the chemicals and all the garbage and all that is cradle to grave. And groundwater is the grave. So there's a new version of an industrial economy and an agricultural economy, which is called cradle to cradle. And it's referred to by those experts as the circular economy. When you design a product or you're going to produce some new food, you look at the entire cycle of that product for its impact. And people do that for human health and whatnot. You're not allowed to bring something on the market that kills people, but you're allowed to bring something on the market that'll be a terrible groundwater contaminant, like PFAS, for example. So we groundwater people need to get our philosophical framework lined up. What is our desire for the future of a sustainable world? And we need to be leaders on that, not just sitting around waiting for a crisis to come along that's interesting. So both my children, who are now middle-aged, and I have grandkids, they both went into environmental engineering. My son took geological engineering, my daughter took chemical engineering, and believe it or not, they both took a course having to use my textbook. And they took the course in the 80s. And then the question my daughter asked, well, Dad, how come there was no coverage of DNAPL in your famous 1979 textbook that everybody says was a perfect book? Like how in 1979 do you publish a textbook with no mention of DNAPL? And in 1980s and 1982, DNAPL's become a global problem. Okay, and the answer to that was basically I wasn't looking to what the problems would be in the future. I was reading the literature to determine what problems have we discovered. And so I didn't ask myself, what contaminants are going to come at us in the future? If I'd asked that question, I would have then said, okay, what chemicals are we using? And I would have just looked up in a chemical records book and I would have found out we were using zillions of gallons of DNAPLs. What are they? What harm could they do? Interesting. Textbooks are generally published by professors writing about what they know, not contemplating what the future is going to be.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have another question here from Eduardo Fleming. He says, I have to translate. The place that the necessitates most are dependable on groundwater are usually the place that are less accessible and less assisted by the government. what's your vision of the participation of government and big companies to help out these places?
Well, that's a very important point, and one of the very important emphasis areas of the Groundwater Project is to make sure that we have as much information as possible that relates to developing countries, but not only developing countries, but the parts of the developed countries that where groundwater is poorly managed or used. So in Canada, for example, we have never-ending groundwater problems in the areas where our Aboriginal people live. It never ends, and in many cases, groundwater would be the solution. So as the Groundwater Project moves along, we have to make sure that we've got the right people in the world writing books on those topics. Like all the technologies used for making wells in the Western countries or the developed countries, those are high technology drilling machines. Those machines, in many cases, can't even get into the areas where people need wells. So one of my personal goals in all of this is to make sure that we don't ignore those problems and we get them out there so people so the groundwater community in all countries then can pay some attention to the needs of these people. So we have nearly 8 billion people around the globe. 2 billion of them don't have good quality water. 1 billion of them are in such dire straits that their water problem is excruciating. And we've got lots of concern about malaria and vaccines and all of those things, but actually water is at the key of it. There's 1 billion people or more around the globe that need groundwater knowledge and groundwater development. We, the hydrogeology community, need to start paying attention to it. And as it turns out, in a little experience I've had with that, the main limiting factor in many, many projects to bring clean water to those people who are out in the hinterlands or who are very poor, the main limiting factor in many cases isn't money, it's groundwater knowledge. It's hydrogeological knowledge. And many projects are a failure because of lacking the ingredients of hydrogeological knowledge. So hydrogeologists are going to be very valuable, and universities aren't producing enough knowledgeable hydrogeologists, but that's another topic.
That's true. Thank you. Thank you. I have a question here. We have some questions from different countries here. A question from Marisa Franklin. Dear Professor Cherry, I wonder, in your opinion, where is the frontier of knowledge in the field of hydrogeology? What are the unsolved problems in hydrogeology? Thank you for the interview.
Well, of course, that's another one of these more difficult questions that I haven't thought through very well. But in general, I would say the greatest need for better knowledge and better synthesis is at the interface between hydrogeology and biology, and hydrogeology and economics, and hydrogeology and ecology. Those interfaces then haven't in general been well researched, and for a variety of reasons, one of which we live in knowledge silos, and universities are based on the premise of knowledge silos. So if I were a young person looking for new exciting areas to do research, I would go to the interfaces. The interface between groundwater quality and microbiology. I mean, there's no end to the interfaces. The problem is, in general, there aren't universities, hardly any universities are focusing on interfaces. And if you're a hydrogeologist and you tell your university you want to take a bunch of courses outside of hydrogeology because you want to know the interfaces, then you're limited on that.
Yeah, that's true.
That's kind of well known. You know, it used to be chemistry and physics, and now there's biophysics, and so the whole idea that the great advances come from the interfaces has been around for a long time. And we in groundwater science have to make sure that we get these interfaces researched, because on our own, then groundwater is viewed as being unimportant. Hydrogeologists are viewed as being unimportant. And that's the way it's going to stay unless we get to the interfaces.
Thank you. Thank you. I have another question here from Berhain Abra. Dear Professor Cherry, how do you see the role of management, managed aquifer recharge in replenishing depleted aquifer and its overall impact on groundwater management? Thank you.
So I went to a conference, it was a IH type conference in Shenzhen, China, in 2016. I guess it was the GQ 2016 conference, and a woman stood up and gave a theme lecture on MAR, Managed Aquifer Recharge. And I'd heard the term and whatnot, and her overview was marvelous. This is an overview by Yan Jing, now at SUSTEC, formerly at Columbia. And so I began to chat with her, and then I kind of realized, wow, MAR has got to be a key aspect of the future, because we're allowing too much fresh water to run to the ocean. And if we allow all the rainfall and whatnot and so forth to run to the ocean as fast as it is, then we're doomed. And we're not going to solve the groundwater over extraction problem by pumping much less, although we got to do some of that. So the only thing we can do then is get more rainfall into the ground. And it's being done in developed countries and in India and whatnot and so forth. So that's the key. Now there's a community, there's an MAR community around the globe, but it's very small, and in shall we say in relative importance in water, it's not very influential. Now the Groundwater Project has a whole list of books that we're going to have on MAR, and those are a very high priority. So wherever we live, we need to say, you know, can we get more of that water beneath the ground? Just get it below the ground, because there's so much storage space that then it's stored there, and then we can use it properly. So groundwater science, hydrogeology, et cetera, has to become very sophisticated. It's got to interface with surface water and storm management and sewage treatment, et cetera. And there are examples across the world where this is being done with sophistication. We need those examples to be written up, people. So, for example, in those countries where it's not yet happening, we need to be able to look at these examples and say, hey, it's happening in South Africa, etc. Very good question. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Well, this point, just to remember that there was, I'd like you to just to, in the same subject, Bruna's PhD thesis was about the compensation of water, and like you pump groundwater and then you have to compensate somehow, like we have the credit, the carbon credit. And not only if you add some some mass of contaminants or any dissolved species in groundwater, and then you release to the surface, you could compensate with clean water, by cleaning water and then by storing water back to the aquifers. What's your understanding of that? Is that possible that we could create like instead of a carbon credit, water credit, for example, a market for that? Because that would boost the water management overall. What do you think?
Well, that's a really good topic. And if we don't go down that road, then I don't think there's much hope. Because where we have groundwater that's already contaminated, in many cases, it's not worth society's resources, financial resources, to try and clean it up. We can control it and be responsible. But the fact that water has become contaminated, then the people who have done that, there needs to be compensation. And so the failure of Superfund and those things in the United States has been not having that. So way too much money has been spent there and in Canada on cleaning up contaminated sites. And my argument has always been, don't spend a bunch of money trying to come clean up that DNAPL. You know, spend the money managing groundwater and all the other things. And what Bruna and her advisors have done then is to convert this into a plausible scheme. And that's an interface. Like that's one of these interfaces with groundwater, with economics, and with risk. And we need to make sure that the Groundwater Project, hits that hard and gets that out there. Because we groundwater hydrogeologists who are so ignored, we need to figure out what battles we want to fight. And we can't fight them all. And we need to have a really clear message that makes sense. And MAR and virtual water and what you just mentioned needs to
Compensation.
be. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. I have a question here for Barbara Zambelli. Dear Dr. Cherry, how to raise awareness about our dependency as a society of groundwater as a vital resource? And how can we act as individual and as communities towards improving water security within climate change scenario?
Well, that's interesting. A community that I've lived in for the last decade is Guelph. And Guelph is on a fractured carbonate rock aquifer. It's the largest urban area in Canada that is actually, groundwater dependent on bedrock. Waterloo region is a larger urban area dependent on groundwater, and it's from overburden. So the fact that Guelph is aquifer dependent has gradually led to a much higher level of awareness. There's respectable degree of groundwater monitoring in Guelph. So the people in Guelph are now aware of groundwater. They need to be more aware, and all sorts of things need to be done on that. So we need to build awareness. And again, I think it goes back to, in many respects, it goes back to monitoring. If people of a city or a particular area know that there are wells there to monitor, it's just like river flow. Everybody knows when the rivers are down, and there's all sorts of alarms when we have a drought, because when we put our sewage into rivers and whatnot, it's not diluted enough. So we need the local people and the schools and all of that engaged in groundwater awareness. So my grandkids are studying geography and a bunch of other things, and I asked them if they're learning anything important. Jokingly, important being groundwater, and the answer is always no. So somehow we in the groundwater community have to get mentioning of groundwater at all of the levels of education. They talk about rivers and lakes and all of those things. Like, what about groundwater? How is that allowed? It's because the teachers don't know anything about groundwater. And we in our little groundwater community, we have to put a stop to that. We need to have the public demanding information on groundwater. University campuses. Like hardly any students on any university campus anywhere have any idea where the water table is. And they graduated in environmental studies and environmental engineering and all that stuff, and they couldn't even carry on a conversation about water on their campus. We need to have we'd have to have big signs up on the campuses, groundwater is here, and you can find it at 15 meters or whatever, So anyway, we need a revolution across the board in education and thinking, and people interested in groundwater need to push it.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Thank you. Miguel, your question, please.
John, as you know, we were talking about the use of water at a very high rate, but the competition is very, very, very big in many places, many countries. I mean, with the industry and the agriculture, and both they have a very big intrusion of changes in the groundwater because of the contamination, not only the use, the consumption.
Yeah.
What do you think for the future? Because of the mines, of course, the use of in mines is very, very asking about what happened with this water. What do you think about this? More of biggest mines or mining areas coming from Canada, and the biggest investment coming from them. How do you think about this big competition in many countries, most in developing countries?
Yeah. Well, so in Europe and in North America, there's not much, relatively speaking. Mining has declined because environmental laws came along and all of that, and that that had a major factor then in the big mining companies moving south or whatever. A huge, not that I know much about this, but huge mining projects in Peru and Mexico, etc. And the big international mining companies then they claim, and in many cases they're moving to be applying basically, the same standards in Canada and the US as would be applied in the South. Now, in Canada, when we go into our north, we have a whole legacy of old mines that we, the Canadian taxpayer, are expected to spend billions dealing with. Because in our heyday of mining, there were no regulations. And so we've learned a lot. And when I hear the stories from my colleagues of these huge mines, say in Peru, they're mind-boggling. Like they're up in the mountains, the size of the efforts are huge, the amount of water is minimal. And but the environmental groups, the Sahara clubs and all of those, they're busy fighting other battles. And I guess it comes down to the fact that when we buy a product or we eat some food or whatever, we need to have all products really in the future need to have an environmental index. And they need to have a groundwater use index. That needs to come. And of course, the problem with mining projects is the governments want the money. Okay, we want the employment, and the aftermath then is decades down the road. And I guess that is the gut issue with groundwater. The consequences of bad management and bad decisions are far enough down the road so that today's politicians can't possibly care. And I don't know how we get around this, but we, the groundwater community, have to be pushing for all products and all projects then to have a groundwater environmental index. We could do that with food, we could do it with products, we could do it with cotton. Like cotton is one of apparently the biggest water users in the water and water polluters in the world. We buy a t-shirt which says, think green, and that t-shirt then could be totally the opposite. I actually have colleagues that I graduated with developing a mine in Mexico, east of Mexico City, and I went out there 3 years ago to see what was going on. And my colleague who owns the company doing that was paying, I would say, great heed to the environmental part of it. Not only that, but when he needed to find water for a mill, he brought his big drill rigs up into the mountains, because you can take them apart and carry them up in the mountains, and drilled a spectacularly good well for the village. And to me, that indicated, wow, there's water there. All the local people are kind of suffering. There's methodology to use drill rigs used in the mining industry to drill wells just about anywhere. You just take them apart and carry them up in the mountains and drill a well. So that the whole issue of metals development, like we're moving rapidly to electric vehicles and all of that, and batteries. Like, what's the groundwater impact quotient on these batteries? Okay, and all these little exotic minerals, a lot of exotic elements are going to have to be there. We groundwater people have no idea. We're not looking at that. Nobody's giving us research grants to study that. And again, this gets back to the issue: what should we be doing environmental research on? What should the community of groundwater professors be researching? We should be researching, in many cases, the things that could be impacts in the future. It's a good concern.
Yes. I have some question from a colleague here in Mexico. She's asking, how is now the project? Because she says that unfortunately in Latin America, many people doesn't have any chance to read in English. And she's speaking, if you have any idea about when will be ready in Spanish. the book.
So we just published, in the last few weeks, 3 of our first new books. Each one would be, say, 50 to 100 pages, and we're going to have a dozen more, published in English before the end of the year. And one of our biggest issues at the moment is figuring out how we get the translation thing going. And we've been totally consumed with the hurdles of getting the English version up on the web in good quality. That's totally consumed us. And now that we know how to do that, now we've got to move on to get the translations done. And yet the Groundwater Project, we have very limited, shall we say, management resources. So we have to get the translations moving in a way that doesn't consume us, our limited management resources. And I'm hoping that we can get a combination of government agencies and individuals and IH chapters to take this on in a way that works. And the problem, of course, with volunteerism, volunteerism is wonderful, but unless it's managed in a particular way, it moves too slowly. Translations are tedious. We'll have lots of volunteers, and the translations need to be checked and double checked. So that now is, I guess, is our, in a way, our big problem of the month now in the Groundwater Project is how can we make this happen fast? Because groundwater information is needed now, and we can't let it linger. Yeah.
Thank you, John. And I have another question from another colleague. In 2012, we had some meeting with Emilio Custodio about, of course, their book,
yep,
The Custodian Llamas, because we were reviewing how is now the impact of this book.
Yeah.
Because, of course, in the past, many of the students in all Latin America and Hispano-America, we were using very fast because it's in Spanish. And it was very interesting because already changed the way to form the students how to share the practice in hydrogeology to the many students now. So how do you think it's now I don't know the future, but the present, and also when we have the chance for some conference like that in Mexico from John Cherry sharing with us in the future, because, well, it's now, I understand it's very complicated now because of the pandemic times, but we would like to have a conference in the future here in Mexico. What's your opinion of both questions?
Well, I, as you know, in the 1980s, made many trips to Mexico, and we had a joint project between Waterloo and UNAM, funded by the Canadian government. And that was a very wonderful time in my career, Mexican students coming up to Waterloo, etc. And that opened my eyes to another world of groundwater problems. And now that the Groundwater Project is kind of rolling, I would be pleased to visit Mexico again and with your help, Miguel, to reconnect to the Mexican groundwater community. That's one of my really responsibilities, is to reconnect or connect in other countries, so that I'm more aware of who's doing what and what the needs are, and then that can feed back into the Groundwater Project, etc. So this COVID issue has been, in a way, wonderful to force us all to learn how to work from home and not get on airplanes too much. And I certainly was going to have a year of airplane travel beyond anything I can imagine. And I was lucky that I was grounded. But once it's opened up, then when we do our travel, it needs to be very carefully selected to get the maximum benefit. So in the future, I would be very pleased to visit Mexico again and reconnect with your community so that the Groundwater Project can serve it as best as possible. And so the Mexican groundwater community can serve the global community through the Groundwater Project as good as possible.
Thank you. And how do you see the new students? Just last question. Nowadays, how the students are changing, and how do you see how the new ways to teach?
Well, today's student, I would say, is in bad shape because they're in transition.
Mhm.
They don't sit down and read a particular textbook to understand it, like the textbook you mentioned, or Freeze and Cherry. They Google stuff kind of randomly. They don't know whether what they Google is coming from a person who knows what they're talking about or not. And then they're distracted. My grandkids, I don't know what's going to happen to them, but they're so distracted.
They're normal.
And I'm not in charge, but and the Groundwater Project is delivering these wonderful textbooks. They're far better than anything I've imagined, but that's not going to solve the problem of learning. So we have to figure out how to take the Groundwater Project materials and convert them into 5 or 10 minute modules that are suitable for various levels of learning. We all learn in different ways. And the materials in the Freeze and Cherry textbook and whatnot, some of those materials were so hard for me to learn. I thought I was so stupid. So learning groundwater is not easy. It's basically, you got a few equations, and then you have to be able to think in 3 and 4 dimensions. So the challenge to the groundwater community then is to figure out how can we package these materials in a way that the younger generation can actually benefit from them. In our generation, we could sit at home and we could study it for hours and hours and hours, and that's not the way it happens now. And it never ceases to. I haven't done teaching undergraduates for a long time. And when I did, a couple of decades ago, I was always astounded at what they didn't learn. And, at first I'd say, well, this is a bad group of students. Okay, next year they'll be better. But year after year, I would find that they were having great difficulty understanding the same old stuff. And so we can't blame it on the students. Like, if students take courses and they're reasonably good students, then at the end of those courses, they should understand certain stuff. And if they don't, then we're all going to be in trouble. So our challenge now is to figure out how do we get learning done in a very challenged world. How do we get students to go into groundwater in the first place? And then how do we get educated in the second place? And getting good students to go into groundwater, that's a major challenge in many places, because groundwater just isn't heard. And universities are very anxious to get students into them. Like all the Canadian universities are busy competing for students. And one of the ways they do that is to make everything kind of, sexy. Environmental studies and all sorts of things. And so, well, how are we going to get people to actually go into groundwater, which is, as we all know, is amazingly interesting. And once you get into it, you're just hooked for life. Every new groundwater problem is a puzzle. Every new well is a puzzle. These interesting puzzles that people can work on. And how do we get students into that world? That's the question.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Just there's one next question. I have 2 more questions, and we'll have to call the end of it. One question is from Paulo Pessoa. He asked, "Dear Dr. Cherry, first of all, congratulations." Excuse me, I have to translate. In Brazil and some other neighbor countries, we have one of the largest aquifers in the planet. And even so, very people know about it, right? How could we make government, to not to continue in this ignorance about this very primordial importance of groundwater and how to initiate consciousness in society about the importance of groundwater through the teaching this vital resource to kids from the early age.
Yeah, it's got to start earlier. And so the Groundwater Project has a path for children's books. And there's one book done 30 years ago that's now on our website. And we're seeking authors to do more groundwater related books for children. And then the next level up then are groundwater books for the general readership, up from the children's books. And that readership then I would say is the high school level, where you know a little bit and you make it interesting and educational. So we have a whole track in the Groundwater Project to bring those books online. And then the next step up is a series of books then written for people who have a technical background or already have an interest, but they're not necessarily hydrogeologists or engineers. And I view those books as in the category of Scientific American. And our first book is now published. It's called The Water Cycle. And I think it's a really good example of what those books could be like. So I encourage everybody on this event to basically look at The Water Cycle on the Groundwater Project. It's written by 5 authors, and I was one of them. And I think it's the broadest coverage, up-to-date view of everything groundwater that's relevant. And nobody's done that before. And it's 100 pages, etc. And it's all illustrated, no equations. We're basically doing it by illustration. So the challenge then to the Groundwater Project and all the volunteers from across the globe that we want to participate is to make sure we've got really engaging, interesting, and accurate groundwater information, readable at all levels. So I got a message a few days ago from a television station that wants my opinion on contamination near the city of Regina, and I didn't respond to it because I'm too busy and maybe I'm not the right person. But what I would like to say to all these media people is before you do an interview, you need to read this. Okay? Like read 20 pages written for a media person like anybody. And that would be how you would qualify to do an interview. That'd be nice to be able to do that. Because the media people will know nothing. They'll want some silly soundbite. And in many cases, those don't get the message across that our political leaders and our water managers need to hear. So we groundwater people have to get our soundbites straight, and we have to be able to kind of train the media. We can start.
That's true. It's not easy. We've been discussing this for quite a while, and it's not easy to be done. So any help, suggestions, please come to the Groundwater Project or to any of the associations involved here, ALHSUD, Águas, IEH. We'll be glad to work together.
Oh, and we need photographs. Groundwater can't be seen. So when you look for photographs of groundwater, you can't find anything. But we need really good photographs of springs, of bubbling water, of vegetation that are sustained by groundwater, etc. We need to get all the photographs that we can get from across the globe that have groundwater in them.
And videos.
And videos, absolutely. If the water's moving.
Very short videos, that's all we need because we're going to embed into our books. That's very important.
We need help.
And we give credit to the authors, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last question, John, is we've seen from Christian, that's all I have from him. We've seen significant pushback on tackling climate change issues from powerful forces in society who have an interest in the status quo. With groundwater impacts being even less visible than climate change, how can we avoid the type of pushback and get everyone on board? Or do we need to be political?
Well,
that's easy.
We, of course, need to be political in our appropriate way. we need to be political in our way, not as alarmists, but just to get the science out there. So again, when it comes to climate change, I try and tell people the droughts that are coming at us are unimaginable. The Cape Cod drought was only 3 years long, and then rain came. The California drought, etc. So climate change means, in a groundwater context, it means either too much rainfall or too little. And floods, for example, can have to do with groundwater. If you change the nature of the landscape and whatnot, and the soil dries out, so that the health of the groundwater environment then has a lot to do with floods and the impacts of droughts. And there's a lot of scientific literature then going back 1,000 years on droughts. So we don't have to look at these future droughts. Okay, whether or not you believe in human-produced climate change or not is irrelevant when it comes to groundwater. Droughts are coming, and they're going to be big. Floods are coming, and they're going to be big. And so professors and everybody who's in the groundwater field, we need to figure out how to explain that. Like, most people have no idea how much groundwater is in the food they're eating. They have no idea that food produced in a certain way uses all sorts of groundwater, whereas food produced in another way doesn't. So that's the awareness has to come then from the very important things relative to politics, floods and droughts. Oh, and fires. So one of the great fires up in the Athabasca tar sands area, the fire came through, and it was a big deal in Canada 4 or 5 years ago, and did much more burning than people thought. Well, why was that? And apparently it's because the peatlands had been drained from the point of view of oil sand mining. And when the water table had been lowered just a little bit, that allowed the fires to just roar. Okay, who knew that? I didn't even know that until I saw an article in National Geographic. So we groundwater people, we have to know these things and be able to explain it. Get all our ducks lined up so that whenever we have a chance to have influence on people who manage water or politicians, we're there to do it.
It's true. Okay, John, it's been a great pleasure listening to your talk as usual, but our time is up. Our time is up. Would like to thank you very much for your time and your patience to explain to us, to offer your knowledge as usual. It's very good to listen to your knowledge and to your nice talk. Okay. I'd like to ask everybody to take a look. This is going to be available on YouTube after we finish this. I like you to, who are hydrogeologists who are involved in this event, tell your friends about this topic, tell your friends about the subjects of groundwater. Go to your social media, distribute this link to everybody, share the links, like the links, put the little finger there, okay? So that's how you can easily help the groundwater community. Just push around the news, get the information from the Groundwater Project, from the Brazilian Association, from the Latin American Association, the NGWA, IAH, and everything else. We have to push this information around. We are responsible for making our groundwater information pass on to other people. That's how we can break this, let's say, this fence that we're working hard to break. Okay, so you can reach out to people that are outside our community. So I'd like to thank you again, John Cherry, and everybody else, Bruna for participating, Miguel, José, Paulo, and everybody that was with us here today, people from IAH, and I hope we'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye.
I'd like to say bye. Thank you for your passion with new students. Yeah, you need. I was in the back, but I was here. Okay. Thank you for teaching new hydrologists and geologists. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And
thank you very much. Bye.
And bye-bye. I'll see you in the afternoon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.